Ooh, welcome back to Q and Assault Saturday. We are back. We were dead for about a week, but now we're alive again. Okay, I come alive on Q and Assault, so you guys can hit me with all your sit star questions for Week 8 of fantasy football. And I found a new scheme formation of how we're going to run the Q and Assaults from now on. Basically, I'm going to ask in Discord before the video starts your hardest or most frequently asked sit starts for the week. And based on the players that I see pop up over and over and over and over again in the beginning, I'm going to cover those guys right off the rip. So I will take, the top 8 guys. And as you can see to my right now, you have Chase Brown, Pop Douglas, Tyrone Tracy, Jalen McMillan, DeAndre Hopkins, Josh Downs, Calvin Ridley, Ricky Pearsall. I was asked about those guys a lot in the Discord. And if you're not in the Discord, you could join for free. But the particular chat that it is in is the Big Dog chat, which is available only to Big Dog members, okay? So you can become a Big Dog member at bdge.co by signing up for our membership there, okay? So I'm going to go through briefly the overview I have for each of these dudes, and these are exactly how I have them ranked. So you might not have exact sit-start questions based on like Chase Brown versus Pop versus Tyrone Tracy or something like that. Maybe you do, but this is exactly how I would play them if these guys are all on my team and I was looking for a flex. But I'm hoping that when I go through all these guys that are very popular sit-starts for this week, it helps you kind of uncover the answer for your guys' questions, because at this point, I think the Big Dog membership, the amount of people that have it and the amount of people that come into the Q&As every Saturday, it has become probably too large for me to answer everybody's questions. So what we're going to do is go through these, and hopefully those help you with a lot of the sit starts. And then I'm going to pick out questions. I won't be able to get to everybody's questions. So I'm going to pick out questions as I see fit rather than going one by one that I think will give the most diversity and have the most help within the comments in the chat. So again, I apologize. Going forward, I will not be able to get to every single person's questions, but hopefully with the variety of questions that I choose, I will be able to reel in, a good amount of analysis on all the players that you are thinking about starting this week. All right. So real quick, before we do jump in, I just want to let y'all know, because I haven't really hit the fantasy audience with this yet. We are hiring right now at BDGE. We're hiring 1 to 2 software engineers. So if you are familiar with Ruby on Rails, if you are a mid to senior level software engineer, we are hiring full-time, all right? 1, 2, maybe even 3 if y'all are good enough and we have enough applications that come through that meet the qualifications. This is a full-time role. This is a remote role if you want it to be. We're looking for very, very talented, passionate coders. We want fingers on the keyboards at all times, all right? So I'll plug that real quickly. You can kind of see on the screen right now. If you know of anybody that might fit this description, please send this to them as well. There will be a ton more info in the description below if you want to learn more about the role as well as apply. We are shutting down applications at the end of this upcoming week, so apply now if you are interested. All right, let's jump into the players for this week. So we have Mr. Chase Brown going against the Philadelphia Eagles. He has had a 60% snap rate over the last 2 weeks cumulated. He's obviously overtaken Zach Moss as the RB1 there. He has had 10-plus carries in 4 straight games and multiple receptions in 4 straight games as well, which is big. If you look at the last month of the season, like clearly Brown has kind of taken over that role. When Zach Moss got hurt, he stepped in and hasn't really looked back, right? A lot of that Tank Bigsby type beat. In that span of the 4 games, he has averaged over 15 touches per game, 66 yards, and almost 15 PPR points per game. He has scored 4 touchdowns in those 4 games, right? Now, this is a Cincinnati offense over the last 5 games that is averaging almost 29 points per game. This is just an offense that you want pieces of, and obviously, the running back who's getting the most touches is going to be a valuable fantasy option here. Now, Zach Moss is still annoying. He's not putting up anything like production worthy that you could throw him into your lineup, but he is playing all the long down and distance role. He is playing the 2-minute drill snaps, which is kind of annoying because Chase Brown's probably more explosive, but they trust him as a pass blocker and someone that has relatively reliable hands. Now, Philly's D is a middle of the pack D against the run. I know a lot of people are like, oh, they're so good against the run. They're not what they were 2 years ago. They have a couple good nose tackles up front, but overall, they're not like an opposing D. They have a pretty big weakness at the linebacker position, which is fucking important when you are a run defense, okay? So I'm not overly concerned with the matchup. I look at Chase Brown as someone, this is a relatively high over-under, and I think the way this offense is clicking, hopefully T. Higgins plays, That fucking bot. I don't know what he's doing at practice. Every single time he practices for like 2 weeks at a time, he gets hurt. Someone just let him sit out practices for the remainder of the year, please. So when I look at Chase Brown, I think he's a rock solid start. Again, he's been averaging almost 15 PPR fantasy points per game over the last 4 games. So he is, to me, a really, really solid low-end RB2 that I would be playing over everybody else on this list. I have Pop Douglas next, who was another really popular sit-start name from you guys. I actually love Pop this week, assuming he's just like fully healthy and over the illness. Would have liked him a lot more if the Jets secondary was still banged up. They were out DJ Reed, they were out Michael Carter. Both of those guys are playing. When we look back at last week, obviously he got sick mid-game, so if you started him, he made you sick as well. Both of y'all ended up with the sick tag at the end of the game because he left after like the first drive or tried to come back and play a snap, whatever. Ended up with like 3 points. He had 2 catches on that first drive. It might have been the first 2 passes of the entire game. Ended up with 2 receptions. And then on that opening drive, when they were in the red zone, he ran a motion. He ran behind the line of scrimmage and ran like a double route where Drake May didn't see him, but he was wide open in the end zone. That could have been what I'm saying is in that London game, Pop was probably going to pop for about 20 PPR points. Okay, so I am still very much in on him. Obviously, it's a much tougher matchup against the Jets, but with Drake May under center, this offense has way more pop in it, no pun intended. And we saw their first time against the Jets when they played him in like week 2 or 3. The only player that did anything was Pop Douglas. He went 7 for 69. So I think last week would have been a major, major week for Pop if he didn't get sick. And then if that happened, we'd be looking at him as like a really, really solid wide receiver too. So Pop Douglas would be my next guy. And then Tracy would be the guy after that. Now, he's still the RB1 in New York right now. He played on 67% of the snaps last week with Devin Singletary returning. Devin Singletary only saw 22% of the snaps. Now, possibly they're easing him back in after a multi-week layoff there with a groin injury, which I think is probably what's happening. I don't ever see it coming back to Devin Singletary in terms of him being the 50, 60, 70, 80% guy there in that backfield anymore. I think it's Tracy's job to lose, but I do think that gap will close quickly. What I think is the most important part here is that Tracy is clearly the passing down back now, okay? He ran nearly 70% of the routes. He was in on all the long down and distance routes. He was in on all the 2-minute drill snaps. And I expect this to be a committee that gives a little bit of work in terms of the ground game to Devin Singletary, but Tracy still has the important usage here. My biggest concern, without a doubt, if you watched any ball last week, it was just how horrid this offensive line in New York looked without Andrew Thomas. He is out for the remainder of the season. That is a big fucking problem for them. They had the single worst run blocking grade per PFF of their season in last week's game without Andrew Thomas. Like, Daniel Jones was sacked about a zillion times, but their run game had nothing going, and they played Pittsburgh this week, okay? That is arguably the best run defense in the NFL. TJ Watt might actually have to pay rent in the backfield after this game. Okay, so when I look at Tracy, I still like the role long-term. This week, obviously, you have to be a lot more hesitant on him because of the matchup and Singletary probably getting a little bit bigger of a role. So if I'm looking at like Chase Brown, Pop Douglas, Tyrone Tracy, he is my 3. Followed closely, but probably another tier down is Jalen McMillan, right? The rookie out in Tampa Bay. We have Evans and we have Godwin out now. McMillan got a ton of buzz, obviously coming out of Washington. He was one of the 3 between Polk and Roma Dunze. Got a ton of buzz this preseason, was playing really well, played really well in the preseason itself, like those games. But then he's been in and out. He's only played like 3 games this year because of a hamstring injury that's kind of lingered. Last week when those guys got injured, Godwin and Evans, he ran 60% of the routes. Sterling Shepard still ran 54%. Trey Palmer was up to 81%. Now, I think McMillan is the most talented out of those 3, but I still think Shepard's going to be a relatively solid slot guy for them. Like, when those guys went down, Evans, it was Shepard pretty much playing the slot. I think Shepard's fine. He's got like reliable hands. At this point in his career, though, like, you can't move Shepard outside. Shepard's not a guy that can play outside. You trust him in the slot, which is unfortunately probably going to move Jalen McMillan outside. And I think his best bet to be like super fantasy relevant would have been to stay in the slot and play that Godwin role and kind of rack up the targets there. So again, I think he'll work his way into being the most targeted wide receiver, although Cade Otton is probably the guy that we're going to want in this passing offense. with McMillan, we just like haven't seen anything in the regular season. So it's really hard to trust him right now. I get it. Hypothetical, theoretical, he should be a guy. I think he's startable, but not enthusiastically. Like Atlanta's coverage grade has actually been really good. We are number 6th in coverage grade per PFF on the year. So we are not a layover by any means when it comes to the passing defense. Now, I think you have to just assume that the Tampa Bay offense going forward is just going to run through the running backs, the talented group of Bucky and Rashad White and Sean Tucker. We don't have Bucky's status yet. He was like pretty doubtful, and then all of a sudden he had a limited practice, and now he might play. If he's playing, then yeah, it's probably going to be a combined like 35 touches, maybe even more for the running backs there. You just have to assume that like this passing offense is going to stagnate at points throughout their drives that they otherwise would not have, and we're probably looking at it much differently. So with Jalen McMillan, again, he's a stash. He's not someone that I'm like dying to get into my lineup right now, although there's a lot of hype on him. He could have a good game, obviously. I think he'll play a lot, and he might get force-fed targets, but I still think I want to see a little bit more before I feel comfortable with it, which moves us into number 5. And I had a really tough time ranking these two, D-Hop and Jalen McMillan. D-Hop is going to play on Sunday. They play at Vegas. Obviously, first game with the new team. Now, I think the easy route, the easy low-hanging fruit here, the easy narrative is that, okay, he's with the new team. How much is he really going to play? Now, we've obviously seen a lot of players come back from injuries, have long layovers, or moving teams and immediately making an impact on their new teams. This is also a game where Casey is favored by double digits, I think, against Vegas. What are they? 9.5 points, so just under that hook. I actually ultimately think that D-Hop is going to be usable this week. Like, I wouldn't cower away from putting him in my lineup if I don't have any other flex options. Like, again, I have those guys underneath him, ranked underneath him. Like, his Titan teammate, Calvin Ridley, is 2 spots below D-Hop. So I would be playing D-Hop over him. I think he'll run a ton of those slants, man. I think he'll run what Rashee Rice was running, what Juju Smith-Schuster was running. D-Hop doesn't have the same, separation skills he used to, but I still think he's a good wide receiver. He put up 1,000 yards last year with that shit carousel of quarterbacks in Tennessee. Then he dealt with the early summer injury, which really hampered his beginning of the season. And then by the time he got into the offense this year, like, their passing offense couldn't get a fucking thing going. So I think it was more a product of the offense and him like not wanting to be there anymore than him not being a good NFL wide receiver anymore. And like, even if he can't get that separation, I still think his hands are strong enough to make most of the plays that Mahomes is going to go to him. And here's why I'm like actually okay or optimistic about D-Hop this week. If he's going to run limited snaps, I think the snaps that he does run for sure, like we saw it with Cooper last week, being in on the red zone is where they're going to use D-Hop. Like, he is going to be the guy. I think they will make a concerted effort when they're on the goal line, inside the 10, inside the 5. I bet he gets at least one chance. If they see him on one-on-one, they're either going to give him a slant where he just has to beat the man in front of him, a one-on-one slant for a score, or a back shoulder fade. Like, they're going to give him, those are his 2 best routes. Those are his, using his long ass fucking arms. He's like 6'1", got a wingspan of 7'1". It's insane. Like, those are his strong points. At the catch point is where D-Hop will excel at this point in his career. So I would be really surprised if he does not get at least one chance down in the end zone there. And that's where he'll make his money for you fantasy-wise. So whether or not he brings it in, that's kind of another story there, all right? So let's move down to, and sorry, guys, if you guys are just joining in, I'll get to questions a little bit. But again, these are the most asked sit-start players up to this point in the week throughout the Discord. I had you guys drop in some of yours, and these are the most requested players. So I wanted to speak on them one by one, just to give you a better sense of how I'm feeling about each of them, and then hopefully you guys, make some sit-start decisions of your own based on that. So D-Hop, like, obviously I'm not going to put him in the wide receiver 2 category, but I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up with like 14 fantasy points this week just based off scoring, a touchdown here. So moving down the list, this is where we get to the tier where I'm far less confident in the players and probably don't want to start any of these guys. You have Josh Downs at Houston. Obviously, nothing I could say to you that you don't already know about having Anthony Richardson under center. I will say the one thing that I think was a little bit overlooked, like A-Rich missed some time, and then he came back last week, and everyone's kind of clowning on him. But Miami Dolphins, they have the single number 1 defense against quarterbacks when it comes to fantasy points scored, okay? It is literally Miami, followed by Chicago, followed by Denver. Like, you know those defenses. You're like, those are stay-away defenses for passing games for quarterbacks. Miami's number one in terms of fantasy points allowed to QBs. And that was also prior to Anthony Richardson playing against them when he scored like 8 points last week. So on the flip side, Houston, they've allowed the fifth most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Like, it's Jacksonville, Tampa Bay, Baltimore, Arizona, and then Houston. And we saw in week one, Anthony Richardson had 27 fantasy points against Houston, only completed 9 passes. But you get what I'm trying to say here. It's on paper a much better matchup, but it's still going to be hard to start Downs with any sort of confidence when Pierce and Adonai and Pittman are all healthy and getting decent run here. So I think the over-under in this game, they are expected to score some decent amount of points, 45.5 over-under. I do think having Jonathan Taylor back will absolutely help alleviate some of the pressure on Anthony Richardson too. So I'm excited to see what this offense can look like at full strength with Anthony Richardson under center. All right, so Downs, don't love it, but don't hate it as much as the next guy. Like, we have Calvin Ridley versus Detroit. I get it. D-Hop is no longer in Tennessee, so all the targets should be going to Calvin Ridley, but all the targets have been going to Calvin Ridley. I'll probably have Mason Rudolph against Detroit. Ridley has had like the most useless targets in the history of the NFL over the last 2 weeks. Like 17 targets that have converted to, I think, like 3 catches for 40 yards, something like that. If he did not have that like fairy tale 40-yard touchdown catch in week 2, Calvin Ridley would legitimately be like the wide receiver 90 on the season. It is bad. He has scored less than like 7 fantasy points in 5 of 6 games this year. Like, he has been unusable in 5 of 6 games this year. For a dude that's just been putting up like 3 points a game, I need to see something with him without DeAndre Hopkins for me to actually feel confident that he's going to be a player without DeAndre Hopkins. Because it's like, okay, D-Hop's gone. Cool, Calvin Ridley's going to get more targets, but he's been getting he's been getting 9, 8 targets a game and still doing fucking nothing with them. So I am not looking to get Ridley in my lineup. And Pierce Hall, I feel like, is probably a more interesting name on paper, but it does sound like both Debo and George Kittle are going to play. Juwan Jennings is apparently not going to play, which is kind of funny because beginning of the week, if you had asked me, I would have put my money on him being the most likely to play out of these weapons, but doesn't seem that way. It makes things messy. Like, Dallas is also awful against the run, so I kind of imagine that Shanahan's game plan will be to attack the ground over and over and over and over again, like Jordan Mason's final supper here, or it's like C-Mac probably back after the bye, week 10, week 11, the latest. So let's run this dude into the fucking ground against the worst run defense in the NFL. Like, obviously they want to get Ricky Pearsall going. He's their first round pick, and you'd love to see it. But I don't know if any of you guys are subscribers to Matt Harmon's Reception Perception website, where he charts wide receiver data, and he's been actually putting out some in-season wide receiver data just to see if some wide receivers' play is matched up to their either prospect profile or last year's routes and et cetera. He did one for Ricky Pearsall this week, just after week 7, so he had a sample size of just 1 game, but it was awful. Like, the dude had no separation last game despite getting 5 targets. And I get it. Like, he's going through a lot. Like, just got shot. He didn't play for a while. He's going to have to get up to speed. You have to get his conditioning up to speed. Also, it's his first time on a fucking NFL field, so the speed of the defenders is much higher. He'll get way better. But that shit doesn't matter for us in fantasy. Like, you either need to do it now while you're in my lineup, or I need to wait until you are separating at an NFL level. So until he's back at full strength, which I don't really think is going to happen for a couple months or a couple weeks, I should say, he's not startable. Like, sure, he might get lucky and catch a touchdown pass here, but even behind him, like, assuming Debo's playing, assuming Jordan Mason's playing, assuming George Kittle is playing, they're probably going to have a rotation of other receivers in a game where they're probably going to throw the ball like maybe 30 times. Jacob Cowing, even Chris Conley last week he ran 73% of the routes. It's like Ronnie Bell's getting some run. Like, it's messy. So if Kittle and Debo and, Ayuk's obviously out, like, they don't all play, I think Ricky Pearsall is fine as like a wide receiver 3 flex. But as it's set up right now, we out here. We are out of there with them boys. All right. So those are the top sit starts for the week, questions that I have had. Hopefully that helps answer some of y'all's. Now I will get to the actual chat questions to hopefully get a little bit of a variety here and help y'all out more. What do we got? So Justin says, Garrett Wilson or Josh Jacobs in my flex, 10-team full PPR. So I actually think that this is going to be a good week for the Jets passing offense. They get the Patriots. Rodgers' best game this year came against the Patriots. Last week, we got so excited about Devontae Adams coming over to the Jets, but they had the worst matchup that you could have in the NFL for any sort of excitement or upside against Pittsburgh, at Pittsburgh. Now they get to play the Jets, or they get to play the Patriots, 7.5-point favorites. Like, I actually really like the passing game to buy into this week for Garrett Wilson. Now, Jacobs is obviously going to get a lot of work. It's a really good matchup against Jacksonville. 49.5-point over-under. I think it's really going to come down to whether or not Jacobs scores a touchdown. So if you have a good feel on that, I think it's really close. Wouldn't be surprised if we saw Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams both have really, really good weeks. I think ultimately, like, the floor of Josh Jacobs is volume. Like, I think he's top 5 in touches this year. Would make me lean Josh Jacobs, but I don't think it's that crazy given the matchup swing that we're now getting for the Jets offense. Smoke cheese. All right. We got pick 2 running backs. We got pick 2 running backs, 1 wide receiver, and 2 flexes. We got Gibbs versus Titans, Mixon versus Colts, Mason versus the Cowgirls, Hunt versus the Raiders. This feels like you're just flexing right now. So you need 2 running backs. Like, Gibbs should never leave your lineup. Mixon, no way, against the Colts is leaving my lineup. You also have 2 flex spots, which means we are going Mason versus the Cow. Wow. Okay, so you have to sit one of these running backs is basically what you're saying. That's fucking brutal. Great problem to have, but I would say, I got to say, Mason's been like the least involved in the passing game out of all these guys and the one scoring the fewest touchdowns. But they all, like, I just don't think you go wrong here. Like, I don't think there's a clear-cut sit here. Every one of these guys is either elite talent, elite role, or amazing matchups. So nothing stands out to me. I don't really have a read. Like, I'm for sure starting Gibbs. I'm for sure starting Mixon. I think at this point you pretty much have to start Hunt. It's between Mason and Swift for me. I don't feel strongly about either one. I think they're all great fucking starts. But those would be my 2 flex spots. And then you have to start 1 wide receiver between Zay, who's been banged up, versus Cleveland. JSN, who is likely going to play without DK Metcalf against Buffalo. And then Keenan/Rome versus the Commanders in another good matchup. I don't really think they're going to have to pass the ball that much. Chicago is probably heavily favored at this point because Jaden Daniels is probably not playing. Chicago's only 3-point favorites in this one, huh? I think I would ultimately lean Keenan or JSN is really close for me. We just did see Keenan kind of have his chemistry game with Caleb there. So I think I'd go back to the hot hand and ride Keenan as my wide receiver. What's up, big dogs? We got a trade question. Okay. Yeah, and like I said, I tried to answer the actually, let me put this back on the screen for anybody who comes in late, just so they know that they can go back to the beginning of the video. I'll put your guys' questions down here. There you go. How's that work? Cool. Trade question into sit start. All right. Kelsey, owner in our league, is desperate for a flex, offering me Kelsey for Kincaid and Kirk. My starters are Kupp, Amari, Waddle. Other bench wide receivers are Keon Coleman and Josh Downs. I've got no problem with it. Like, I would rank Kelsey over Kincaid rest of season, but I don't know that I feel like super strongly about it. And Kirk's been kind of nothing. Kincaid's been kind of nothing. I don't know that it's like a huge win for you. I think it's an upgrade to tight end at the cost of giving up Christian Kirk, who hasn't been great either. So I would ultimately probably make the trade because now's the time of the year when you're starting. You should probably start to condense your depth into your best starters, because like the later you get into the season, you know the depth charts really well. The committees well. Players are, despite like how many injuries happen, like the players that end up having a lot of like hamstring pulls and muscle strains, that typically happens at the beginning of the season as opposed to the later part of the season. Not saying it can't happen, obviously, but like usually when players are first ramping up into like game speed conditioning, that is when the majority of those types of muscle pulls happen. So again, like I think we'll see less injuries going forward. I think we'll see less random dudes just kind of like pop off going forward. So again, you want to like start to upgrade. If you have depth with like really good players, especially guys, we're moving past bye weeks, especially like this is when you want to condense it. So I'm cool with that. Spencer, what's up, Poppy? So we have half PPR, start 1 tight end, 2 flex. We have Kraft or Kincaid, flex either of those 2 tight ends, Pickens, Bucky, Eckler, Wicks, D-Hop. Okay, so we need to start 1 tight end of Packers and the Bills. I absolutely lean with Tucker Kraft. He's been playing basically out of his fucking mind. The over-under is 49.5. The Jaguars' passing D is atrocious. Moving on to 2 flex. Pickens would be my 1 here for sure, coming off of that nice 30% plus target share with Russ under center for the first time, and they got a really good matchup against the New York Giants' disgusting pass defense. I mean, the over-under is 36.5. I don't know how many times he's going to have to throw the ball. Unfortunate. I don't know if we're ever really going to get high volume out of Pickens, but like you saw how willing Russ was to just throw it up to Pickens. So Pickens is going to be my 1 there. Then we have Bucky. I don't know if we have like a real update here. I still think it's doubtful that he plays, but let me see if we have any like real time. He said he thinks Bucky's going to play in week 8. He expects it. I don't know that I buy that completely, but Falcons have a tough run D. It's going to be somewhat of a 3-headed committee. I think I'm actually okay with one of the other wide receivers. We have Wicks, who played well last week and also gets the Jaguars. So you have this Packers offense that I might just be buying into fully. And then we have D-Hop, who I kind of told you probably run limited snaps, but I think he's going to be involved in the red zone, which at the end of the day, like it's not like Dontavian Wicks is a full-time player. It's not like Eckler's a full-time player. Like you got to start asking yourself that as well, because when you look at these guys, it's like, sure, Bucky and Eckler and all these guys have been a part of their offense for longer than D-Hop has. But at the end of the day, like Bucky's going to get 40% of the snaps because Rashad White's going to take a lot, and Sean Tucker will take his 15, 20%. Eckler's obviously going to lose a lot of work to Brian Robinson, maybe even Jeremy McNichols. So I really don't think D-Hop, despite on paper it feels like he's like the worst option here, I don't think he's bad either. What I would do there, I would lean towards one of the wide receivers. I think I'll leave that up to you. I like both of their matchups. I like both of the situations that they're in. But yeah, I like Kraft, Pickens, and then either Wicks or D-Hop. We've got a tight end question. We've got half PPR from Mr. John. We've got Cade Otton or Jake Ferguson. Okay. Now we've got Jakey against the 49ers, and you have kind of the red-hot Cade Otton first full game without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. It feels like Otton kind of jumps off the paper here. I still think I'm going to go with old reliable. Excuse me. Old reliable in Jake Ferguson here. I think they're both really good options, and I don't think you're going to be mad at whatever way that you end up going. But I still feel like Jake Ferguson is the more proven guy. Whereas, again, on paper, Otton feels good, but he's also really hasn't shown much throughout his career that feels like he's an upside play or a dude that like elevates his offense or elevates what he does. Like he doesn't really make plays after the catch. He doesn't do a lot of that stuff. He is just a good, solid, like hands dude that might get targets. But you really never know how the targets are going to divvy up. This is the first week where they're going in without these guys. So the game plan might be a little bit different. It might be really running back heavy. I'm going to go Jake Fergie here. How we done? All right, we got some new names here-ish. Full PPR, flex option, Pop, Downs, Dobbs, Bateman, Najee. All right, so if you see from the chart to the right here, obviously these are the order in which I would rank these dudes for the week. I have Pop clearly over Downs, so that will knock him out. Really love what we saw from Dobbs last week, obviously. Gets a really good matchup against Jacksonville. Bateman feels like a very hot name based on, how he's been playing recently. And Zay Flowers is pretty banged up right now. Missed 2 practices, but they do get Cleveland. And I think if Zay Flowers sits, then it's going to be really tough for a dude like Rashad Bateman to win in coverage against Denzel Ward. So I'd probably throw him at the bottom. Najee's been playing lights the fuck out. And the Steelers get a really good matchup against the Giants. They're 6-point favorites. So I really like Pop. I really like Dobbs. I think if you're going for upside, I would go with one of the wide receivers. Sorry, I'm still a little bit sick. I'd go with one of the receivers. If I'm going for floor, I'm fine starting Najee. But obviously, we've seen floor games out of Dobbs. We've seen floor games out of all these out of all the Packers wide receivers. But if I'm going upside, if I'm going pure upside, I'd probably go Dobbs. If I'm going for a mix of floor and upside, I'd go Pop. If I'm going for just floor, I'd go Najee. So I think they're all probably in the same tier, and I feel relatively good about all of them. Got a QB question. Bo Nix is versus Carolina, or banged up Jaden Daniels versus the Bears if he plays, or should I pick up Drake May or Rodgers off of the waiver wire? What if Jaden Daniels doesn't play? So I think Bo Nix is a fine stream this week. I would be shocked if Jaden Daniels does play this week through the rib injury. So I honestly wouldn't even really factor him into it. Would I play Drake May this week? No. I love what he's done so far, but this is one of the tougher matchups that you're going to find in the NFL. You could play at Pittsburgh, you could play at some of these other really tough matchups, but against the Jets is they're getting Michael Carter back, they're getting DJ Reed back, so their secondary will be at almost full strength for this one. So as much as I like Drake May long term, and I think he's super streamable in good matchups, don't love it. Rodgers has a good matchup, but there's always the chance that they go extremely run heavy, and Rodgers only has to throw the ball 20 times. I think that's probably the case with Bo Nix as well. It's really close between Nix and Rodgers for me. If you have to drop, it's not far enough off that if I have to drop a dude like Pop Doug, anyone on the list over there, if I have to drop Pop or McMillan or Josh Downs in order to pick up Rodgers, then I'm not going to do that. And obviously you're not going to drop Jaden Daniels. Trung Nguyen. That's a fucking hard-ass name. Trung Nguyen, how you doing? He says, hey, what's up? Full PPR. I have DJ Moore. I have Amon-Ra St. Brown. I need a flex suggestion for Tony Pollard, Terry McLaurin, and Marvin Harrison Jr. Okay, so a few moving parts here. Tony Pollard has looked like the workhorse, but they play against Detroit in Detroit as 11.5-point dogs. Obviously, the offenses look like dog shit. So the game script won't really be there, and Detroit's run defense is, about as good as it comes. If we look at the grade per PFF, they're actually number 9 right now. They were a lot better earlier on, but still a really tough defense to run against. So he might catch some passes, but this feels like one of those games where he'll go 4 for 20 through the air. Terry McLaurin, really tough matchup, and will likely be playing with Marcus Mariota against Chicago. Their pass defense is fucking elite. And then you have Marvin Harrison Jr., who, again, I said at the beginning when I was going through the Josh Downs outlook, Anthony Richardson played against Miami last week and struggled because they blitz him at such a high rate, and Miami's defense for fantasy points allowed is number 1 against quarterbacks. And let me just check in. That likely means that they're number 1 against wide receivers as well. And MH is probably going to see a ton of Jalen Ramsey. So really tough matchups, especially with Kyler kind of playing really on and off right now. I think I'd ride Pollard here. That's where I'd go. Mr. Influence, we got a trade question. And again, sorry, like I said at the beginning of the video, if you're just popping in here afterwards, going forward, I will be kind of giving a breakdown of all the players on the right here, guys that are most frequently asked sit starts for that week at the very beginning of the video. So if you have these guys and you're asking questions about them and you want to hear more about their overview that I have for them for the week, you can scroll back to the beginning of the video. It should be available for y'all to do that. And then I'll try to answer questions that I feel like are a little bit differentiated or versatile. So I'm not just answering the same dudes and giving the same outlook over and over and over again. But that will be how Q and Assault goes moving forward. Full PPR, trade Chubb and Pollard for Higgins. I have Jacobs, Dobbins, and JT. So a really nice roster of running backs. As my running backs, my wide receivers are Reed, MHA, JSN, Addison, and Pop. Opponent asking for a trade also has CD, Cup, and BTJ. Okay, so I think I'm fine with this trade based on your team. I kind of feel like you shouldn't have to throw in Chubb on top of it. Pollard for Higgins feels doable. It feels right. Like Higgins is a top 15 wide receiver. Pollard is probably like a top 12, top 10 running back. I also would wait on Higgins' injury status. Like he had the random quad that popped up yesterday. So if he misses this game, you have to take that into account. You could say like, because he's about to miss a game and he still has a bye, I think they still have their bye, like that has to factor into this trade. And that I feel like should be the thing that takes Chubb out of the trade, in my opinion. If I had to rank the receivers, I think what you have on paper, like Pollard for Higgins, is probably the perfect trade. CD's way too expensive. Like you won't get him in that trade. If you could, then yeah, I would definitely. The way I'd rank them rest of the season would be CD, Higgins, and then Cup and BTJ are kind of in a tier for me. Like I get Cup just played well. I think if you were watching the game, he clearly still is less than 100%. He lacked explosiveness. Like he was not the old Cooper Kupp that we saw in like week 1, week 2 before he got hurt. And maybe he gets back to there, but I also think this high ankle sprain is probably going to lack explosive or, leach some explosiveness from him for the foreseeable future. There's always a chance that he gets traded. Puka clearly seemed like the one there. Kupp got a lot of targets, ran a lot of routes, but it was Puka over Kupp. So I actually feel like I'd have Higgins over Kupp. They're probably in the same tier for me, but I would still take Higgins over Kupp rest of season because of how good this Higgins and the Cincinnati offense has looked, and then BTJ's underneath him. So I think you have the right idea there. I would be okay going Chubb and Pollard for Higgins here. I think it's fair. I think it's a good move. If there's a world where you can convince him not to take Chubb, I would like that a lot more. If there's a world where you can down tier from Higgins to Kupp and take Chubb out of the trade, I might consider that as well. But overall, I'm okay with it, and I'm cool with it based on your team. We have Dak or Goff, 6 point per passing touchdown, and pick 2 between Rachaad White, Dobbs, and Olave for S. Okay, so we got a good quarterback question that we have not gotten to yet. We got Dak versus the 49ers, 47.5 point over under. Passing game has really yet to click so far, whereas Detroit is clicking on all cylinders. They are a goddamn wireless mouse right now with the clicks. Going against Tennessee, which has a tougher pass defense than San Francisco right now. Really, for Detroit, like Goff has been so good in the last 3 weeks. I think he's been like the quarterback 4, 4, and 11. It always just comes down to like who scores the touchdowns. Like when they get inside the 5, do they let Goff rip the ball or do they just give it to David Montgomery? So it's really tough to pick. Coming off of the bye, this is the one thing I think like people forget about. A lot of the offseason talk with Dak and CD and their passing offense was like second half of the year last year was when they dialed shit up, and Dak and CD were the quarterback 1 and wide receiver 1 in fantasy post-bye. They just had their bye. I'm really intrigued to see if we see a kind of contextual switch in the offense. Now, they've already been throwing the ball a ton. I think Dak is second in the league in pass attempts right now. And they are throwing at a high rate, obviously, because they don't have a run game. So I don't know what more they can really swap here. But I think there's some hope given what we saw post-bye last year for them. That being said, I don't think you go away from Goff right now. I don't think you go away from the way that Detroit is playing at this point. So I'm going to lean Goff, but I don't blame you if you wanted to go Dak, given that Jamison Williams is going to be out, and that probably hurts them stretching the defense a little bit. Then we have pick 2 for Rachaad White, Dobbs, and Olave. Okay, so we got Olave back playing against the Chargers, got Spencer Rattler. We got Dobbs against Jacksonville. Dobbs would actually probably be my one here. And then we didn't get a PPR or anything like that. I would say crazy as it sounds, if Bucky plays, I'm going to lean towards both wide receivers. If Bucky does not play, I'm going to start Rashad White and Romeo Doubs there. You down? Some kind of cod walada. Welcome back, Nikki. Thank you, you kind individual. Half PPR. Any chance you are starting Debo this week over the likes of Tony P, Pop, Wicks? Sorry for the repeat. Watch you scroll past it. No problem. This is a good, interesting, versatile question here. So, any chance I'm starting Debo this week? Yes, I am. As weird as it sounds, I am starting Debo as if he's a full go. If Debo is active, I am going to be playing him in his normal capacity. So I would play him over Pop and Wicks, yes. And then in that situation there, I would play, I guess if you need upside, I'd go Wicks over Pop, but normally I'd probably play Pop. It being half PPR does make me a little bit weary about Pop, but I think I'd ultimately go Tony P and then Debo, Pop, Wicks. All right, so we got Christian Kirk, Jacoby Myers, or Sterling Shepard, Tyrone Tracy, full PPR. Wait. This confuses me a little bit, Brandon, because... Okay, I think you followed up next. Okay. Kirk, Myers, Tracy, Shepard. Pick one full PPR. All right, so we have Jacoby definitely playing. I know him and Max Crosby both missed a couple practices, but then participated, I believe. Okay, yeah, full on Friday, so they should both be playing. Okay. So you've got Myers against the Chiefs. Their defense is just unreal right now. You've got Christian Kirk, who's been completely fucking erratic this season, but they do get a good matchup against the Packers with a 50-point over-under. You got Shepard coming in as the slot guy right now, full PPR. Tracy, yeah, I still think I'm actually going to roll Christian Kirk here. As ugly as it feels, I still think that like he'll have his good games. Like, we were panicked over the first 2 weeks, and then he had 2 really good games, and then he's been shitty. I think he'll get involved again. So I'm actually going to go Kirk here, Brandon. Johnny Baby, is Bigsby the one in that Jacksonville backfield now? Are either of them even usable moving forward with them being behind in game script over almost every game? Yeah, I mean, this is probably one of the toughest questions to answer in fantasy right now. You'd like to just say it's Bigsby's backfield. I guess the one thing that you do look towards is like they clearly really trust him, right? Like you don't give a running back 25 carries unless you feel like you can ride him to the victory, which we saw last week. ETN might be limited because he's coming back from the injury. Doug Peterson did come out and say that he doesn't believe guys should lose their starting job through injuries, but like at the end of the day, if you're the fucking head coach for a team and you're on the hot seat of getting fired and you believe that this guy is your best chance to win games, I don't think you give a fuck about some soundbite that you gave away 3 weeks ago. So I am okay starting Tank. I'm not throwing Travis Etienne into my lineups at any point until we see like a 15 to 20 point PPR game from him and actually feel good about the usage. Tank, I'm okay with. Obviously, the game script is not going to be great, and he does not catch passes, but I don't think the game scripts are going to get away to the point where like they're 4-point underdogs at home. So 4 points is not like, it's not a game script where you get away from the run completely. If you're the Raiders and you are 9.5-point dogs, or you're the Panthers and you're 11-point dogs, that's where the game scripts get funky enough where you have to completely abandon the run. So I don't think we're going to see a ton of game script for Tank this week where we like have to really, really worry about it. Their coach just said on X again that ETN is still the number one when he's back. Yeah, I'll kind of believe it when I see it. He's still questionable. He's a game time decision right now. I just don't believe that. I just don't believe that they're going to use ETN over Tank Bigsby in goal line situations or on the majority of running work. But yeah, I mean, obviously, Bigsby has no receiving targets anyways. Correct. He has like 1 target on the year. Trade question. Would you move Bucky for Higgins in full PPR in a heartbeat? If I can get Higgins there, I would move Bucky for him in 1 second. I would leave this video fucking right now and go do that. All right. So that's going to wrap up. We're at 45 minutes. That'll wrap up Q and Assault for week 8. As always, I do this every single Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern time. Week 9, we'll be doing the same thing. If you want to join next week's Q and Assault, the easiest way to do it is on bdge.co. Become a member. Actually, the cheapest way to do it and the easiest way to do it is by going to underdogfantasy.com or the Underdog Fantasy app, downloading it and depositing with promo code BDGE, $10 or more. And that'll get you a deposit match. That will get you a free square on the app of half a passing yard, I believe, for whoever's playing tomorrow. And that will get you access to the membership for the rest of the year. Both free, all right? Underdog Fantasy, download it with code BDGE. Deposit $10 on there. And again, real quick before I leave you, because some of you guys might have forgotten, we are hiring 2 software engineers here at BDGE, all right? Ruby on Rails engineers, mid to senior level software engineers. If you know anybody that is in the market or yourself, please apply at the link down below in the description. Let me know how you felt about this format for Q and Assault. I felt like it went a million times smoother and was a lot more valuable as it relates to the content. All right. I'm out of here. Good luck in your matchups tomorrow. Smoke cheese.